Hello, I'm Caroline Fairchild, and welcome to LinkedIn News Live, where the business conversation begins with you. Today, we have trending coverage for you on the growing malware problem following the recent hacks of U.S. infrastructure. According to the Department of Justice, this year is poised to be the worst year ever for extortion-related cyber attacks, especially as hackers are becoming more savvy and businesses are paying them off. I want to bring in cybersecurity expert Nicole Friedlander. Nikki is a partner in Sullivan and Cromwell's Criminal Defense Group and co-head of the firm's cybersecurity practice. She advises major corporations in cybersecurity and criminal matters. She has her JD from New York University School of Law and was chief of the Complex Frauds of Cyber Crime Unit at the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of New York. Nikki, welcome to LinkedIn News Live.
Thanks for having me, Caroline.
All right. Also with us today is Frank Ford. He's with Bain & Company. He's their global cybersecurity practice head and a member of the EMEA Enterprise Technology and Public Sector and Government Practices. He's based in London. He's a graduate of Cambridge University, and prior to Bain, spent 18 years at Accenture. Frank, thanks for joining us as well.
Thank you for having me.
So this, as I'm sure is not a surprise to either of you, is a growing conversation that we're seeing at LinkedIn. A lot of our members have questions. If you're joining us in the stream right now and have questions for either of our experts, please let us know. We'll get those answered in the show. But let's just start with you, Nikki. Why is this happening now? There is so many infrastructures right now. If you think about gas, you think about food, you think about hospitals that are being attacked right now. Why is this such a problem at this point?
Yeah, it's a very good question. I think there are a few reasons why ransomware has become such a huge problem now. First, the barriers to entry for criminals have gotten lower. Criminals no longer have to be hackers to use ransomware because the hackers have developed ransomware as a business and as a business model in which ransomware attacks are just another service that they provide for a fee. They provide the hacking services. Go ahead.
Right. And I was just going to say, there's about 1,000 of these attacks happening a year now, which is just an astonishing number. Frank, in terms of what these attacks have in common, where's the common thread here?
So I think the key thing is that it is an industry and people are looking to monetize money as quickly as possible. The thing with ransomware is it's a very immediate issue for a company if there's a successful attack. So the attackers can turn it into a lucrative revenue stream very, very quickly. Other cyber attacks are typically longer to turn into revenue. So that's one reason why ransomware is particularly on the increase. And I think the common thread really is companies and services which really have an issue if their operations get disrupted and they have to fix them very rapidly. And then the temptation is to pay to resolve the problem quickly versus the typically more significant challenge of fixing the problem without actually paying the ransom.
Well, I definitely want to get into that debate of whether or not CEOs, companies should be allowed to pay the ransom or not. But before we do, Nikki, industrial espionage is not new. You've been covering cybersecurity for your career. What about this new digital component is making this extortion easier, as you were just discussing?
I think there are a few problems that contribute to how easy this has become. First, there's no deterrence. The perpetrators live mainly in companies that don't cooperate with U.S. law enforcement. They're in Russia, they're in North Korea. And so to the extent they're successful, they're not apprehended. They can act with freedom. Another issue that may be fueling the problem is the extent to which these countries are deliberately encouraging criminals to act against the United States. And finally, I would say whether or not ransomware is truly becoming a greater problem, there's greater focus on it now, particularly with the compromise of Colonial Pipeline, which is the first ransomware attack that we have seen that has significantly impacted U.S. critical infrastructure.
And, when we think about what happened in Colonial Pipeline, I think it was very shortly after that the FBI director prompted this comparison to 9/11 in terms of where we are with the security of the country and the risk of the country to further attacks. Frank, do you think that comparison to 9/11 is accurate?
So I think the real issue is the attacks on the critical infrastructure and the damage it can cause, to the country level capabilities and society. So it can be enormously disruptive. Many governments around the world do regulate on this issue, and they do require critical infrastructure providers like power companies, distribution companies, utilities, etc., to meet certain requirements around cybersecurity. So there is sort of active legislation around these topics, recognizing the particular importance of critical infrastructure. And there is always a risk that the impact of the cyber disruption could be very significant, because these types of attacks are not easy to undo if they penetrate very deeply into an organization. Hence, the option that some people take to pay for it.
And let's take a minute to explain the regulatory landscape right now for the members who are joining us in this stream. What are Biden's options right now? I know that he's mandated that some industries report these ransomware attacks immediately, but not all. What are some other things that he has on his plate right now on his agenda in terms of deciding where to go next?
Yeah, well, the Biden administration is moving decisively to enhance regulatory requirements across industries. I would say that one of the most significant things it's done is to issue an executive order in the last several weeks on strengthening the nation's cybersecurity. By its terms, the executive order applies to all federal agencies and certain critical contractors. But this order will have the effect of establishing norms and standards that reach across industries. I think that's what we're going to see in the coming years. You will see companies held to the standards of the executive order in litigation, by their regulators, and by their customers. The order requires a series of significant improvements in cybersecurity, and so I think that you will see it have some real impact. But in terms of what the Biden administration can do to stop this problem, that is a very, very difficult question to address. This is a problem that is at heart a national security problem, and is going to involve discussions and negotiations and relationships with hostile nation states.
And Frank, when you think about that challenge that the Biden has in front of him right now, what comes to mind in terms of what he should be thinking about, or where you see the biggest challenges are at this point?
Yeah, so there's a couple of areas. So firstly, the parts of the administration can directly, control federal organizations, companies they do business with. They can mandate certain standards and enforce them very strongly. So that absolutely should be done. For the broader business community, though, I think there are two key areas to focus on. One is helping business to become better at cybersecurity. So that really comes around sort of education and making it easier to solve the problem. Because one thing that's not often appreciated is that maintaining a strong cybersecurity posture is actually very challenging for companies, even those that spend a lot of money at it. It's very tough. The data shows that most companies are actually not that strong at cybersecurity, so they do need help. So a push for education, a push for support in terms of clearer standards and direction would be very valuable. And then, complement that with, regulatory requirements, particularly for critical infrastructure related organizations is, we think, the way to go.
Well, Frank, I'm seeing a ton of members joining us in the stream right now and business owners who are looking for that guidance and that help. So I appreciate you both taking the time to speak with us. Vicenzio from Italy is joining us, Robert from Massachusetts, Paul from Canada, and Joshua from Arkansas. Thanks for joining us here on LinkedIn News Live. Well, guys, let's dive deep into the hearing yesterday with Pipeline CEO Joseph Blunt. And he spoke quite openly about the decision that he made to pay the ransomware. I'm going to play that clip for you guys right now and get your take.
First, the ransom payment. I made the decision to pay, and I made the decision to keep the information about the payment as confidential as possible. It was the hardest decision I've made in my 39 years in the energy industry, and I know how critical our pipeline is to the country, and I put the interests of the country first.
Nikki, I know that you spend, just like Frank, spend time advising businesses on the decision that Joseph Blunt had to make around paying that ransomware. He says it's the most difficult decision he's had to make in his career. Do you think that that's accurate? And why was it so challenging?
I think this is a very, very difficult decision for companies to make. And nobody wants to pay ransom to criminals. Nobody wants to be, held responsible for that. Nobody wants to give money to some nameless, faceless, perpetrators of crime. On the other hand, he had very serious security concerns at issue. The pipeline services to the whole East Coast were being disrupted, and companies in this position often face these types of really, really difficult decisions. They're very fact-dependent decisions. They're not easy to make. So I don't doubt that it was an extremely difficult decision.
And Frank, anything to add there?
No, I would agree. I think it comes down to the risk to ongoing service disruption versus the paying, which you don't want to do, but returning to service rapidly. Because without payment, it can take a significant amount of time to restore service. So if it's a critical infrastructure that you're operating, then you may run out of practical options pretty quickly. And so you're kind of forced into it to some regards.
And Nikki, in terms of the tension that we're talking about right now, is that a lot of companies feel like they don't want to pay the ransom, but if they don't, they might go out of business. So what would happen in practice if, say, the government says it's illegal to pay the ransoms?
I think you would see very severe disruption to businesses of all kinds. And we're talking about Colonial Pipeline served the entire East Coast of the United States. So what they would have to do in practice is rebuild the affected systems. Now, some companies have backups that make that easier to do, and some companies don't. And there's a lot of work that has to be done, even if you have backups, even if you have a decryption key that enables you to, break through the ransomware. There's a lot of work that has to be done before those systems can be brought online. But if companies were truly prohibited from paying, I think you would see much, much more disruption across industries than even you see today.
And I'm seeing a question here from Edward in the stream. He's asking if companies hire these criminals to try and hack their networks. Do either of you advise that as a best practice when it comes to cybersecurity planning, or how does this work in terms of getting maybe the bad guys back on the good side?
So please go first.
I was going to say, I wouldn't advise any companies to hire criminals, but there are excellent external and even internal cyber experts and teams that participate in red team exercises where they try to hack into the company to find the weaknesses and the vulnerabilities. And that's a very effective tool for cybersecurity planning.
Yeah, just so fully agree. It's a key part of maintaining a strong posture to test how good your cybersecurity is. So, penetration testing, or sort of white hat hacking, as it's called, is a very useful way to test your capabilities. So having people think like an attacker and test your defenses and try to find weaknesses that you can then fix before a real attacker finds them.
So Frank, just going back to what you were talking about earlier on in the show about the necessity for companies to beef up their cybersecurity efforts to make sure that they have comprehensive plans. Are there plans that should be in existence where the plan should be to pay the ransom, or should that just be off the table completely?
So I think no company would want to plan that, I think, as a response. I think there are other ways of mitigating the risk. I mean, cybersecurity in simple terms, I think, comes down to sort of two main elements. So Firstly, you want a robust security posture, meaning that you can withstand the vast majority of attacks. But the reality today is that attacks do get through, and most big companies will tell you that they expect to be breached at least once annually. So they have to prepare for the breach event. So this is where the resilience side comes in. So the ability to recover rapidly. And the focus is on both, but the resilience side is really important so that you plan for a situation where if your critical systems or a subset of them are indeed encrypted through a ransomware attack, that you have the ability to continue sort of service operations. It's not easy to do, but with sustained focus on investment, it is possible to strengthen your business so that you can be both robust and resilient to certainly a much greater extent versus not focusing on these topics. So really it's a question of focusing on resilience and having strong enough business continuity and sort of workarounds already figured out for if and when the the attacks get through.
And off the news just a couple days ago that the FBI was actually able to recover part of Colonial Pipeline's ransom. Two questions there. We're seeing a ton of members on LinkedIn asking. One is, does that recovery mean that blockchain actually really isn't that great of a blackmail tool? And two, do those recoveries, have you seen that they ward off future threats when the FBI does actually step in and bring the ransom back?
Well, I'll say first, it's exceedingly rare for the FBI to be able to do that. So I don't know that anyone's in a position to say what deterrent effect that will have. I would note that while they got the money back, they have not yet identified or apprehended the criminals, which I think would be a much more powerful deterrent mechanism. As to the question about blockchain and blockchain security, it's not clear how the FBI was able to obtain the private key here. So I don't think there's enough evidence in the public record for people really to form a view on that. I think we'd need to know more about how this happened.
All right.
Yeah.
And I want to make sure that we get to this question from Chuck in the stream, who's going back to saying, should cyber attacks against our nation's infrastructure, including banking and commerce, be classified as criminal activity or an act of war when launched inside of the nation state?
I think that's a complicated question, but a terrific one. I think there are certainly circumstances in which cyber crimes and cyber offenses are used as effectively tools of war. So I think that is a question that the Biden administration itself will be giving a lot of thought to.
Yeah, it's an interesting balance. I mean, when governments become aware of weaknesses in cybersecurity defenses, so key technologies that have newly discovered weaknesses, they have to make a decision on whether they alert the manufacturer of the product or software so they can address the gap, so to close it down before it becomes a problem, whether they keep it private, keep it secret, and weaponize it in increasing their ability to use it offensively against the nation's adversaries. So every government makes those decisions, and they come down in a particular place on any given vulnerability that they become aware of. So this sort of balance between what is alerted, what is weaponized, is a very active conversation, I think, within governments.
And Frank and Nikki, I don't have to tell either of you that this problem is not going away anytime soon. Frank Baines did some research on this exactly, talking about how the pandemic and just the hybrid work from home model is impacting how companies respond to cybersecurity. Frank, bring out a little bit of what that research told us, and also anything that you think companies should be thinking about moving forward to beef up their cybersecurity efforts in the pandemic.
Sure. I mean, the shift to increased home working really changed some of the challenges around, cybersecurity. So, more people working at home, different types of risks, people using all sorts of devices at home, whether they're printers or, communication devices to connect back to the office. The difficulty in getting, top quality equipment that was sold out for a long time. So all of this increased the risk that companies were taking. It's been going on for a while now, so many companies have met that challenge and improved their controls around these types of topics. But I think the bigger issue that I think is, just to go back to, we mentioned it earlier, around helping companies get good at cybersecurity. It's often easy to underestimate how complex it is. There's sort of layer and layer of complexity on things to get right. I mean, the average company uses 60 to 100 different technical products and services to protect themselves, a big enterprise. They'll employ a lot of people, they'll spend quite a lot of money. but they won't necessarily cover all of the critical areas effectively. And the data shows that on average, across industry, that the standard is not as high as you would like it to be, or companies would like it to be. So there's really a need for renewed focus on cybersecurity. And although many companies have it as a sort of a top global risk, big ones, that they think about, a more effective approach for improving cybersecurity is critical.
Nikki, anything to add there as top of mind as you're advising companies through the pandemic?
Oh, sorry, Caroline. I was just going to say I agree completely with those comments. I think that the cybersecurity challenge for companies is more complex than it may sometimes seem. It's not, unfortunately, a matter of just committing resources, although resources are key. It's not only a matter of training personnel, although that is key too. It's an incredibly complex problem because you're talking about inevitably complex networks. The testimony from the Colonial Pipeline CEO yesterday I thought was really interesting on this point. It was said that the problem came from a lack of two-factor authentication on a legacy VPN account, but the fact that it was a legacy account makes one wonder if the company was even aware that it was out there. It can be very complicated to keep track of all of the systems and networks and servers and accounts that a company has, so that the problem takes quite a lot of work, even beyond a commitment of money and training.
Well, Nikki and Frank, I know I speak for the stream when I say thank you so much for taking this complicated problem and breaking it down a bit further for us. I see a lot of members thanking you for your time, and I'm echoing their sentiment as well.
Our pleasure.
Yeah, thank you very much.
That was Nikki Freelander from Sullivan and Cromwell, as well as Frank Ford from Bain, breaking down just the increase that we're seeing in ransomware attacks right now across the nation. I want to thank them both for coming on. And to continue the conversation with Nikki and Frank, you can be sure to check out the news module to the right of your LinkedIn feed. Or if you're in mobile, you can click into that search box. All right, tomorrow on LinkedIn News Live, we're back with you at 3 Eastern for a conversation about how COVID has upended the caregiving economy. We dig into the problems and solutions with Care.com CEO Tim Allen, as well as Time's Up CEO Tina Chen. That's tomorrow at 3 Eastern from the LinkedIn News page. I'm Caroline Fairchild. Thank you so much for joining us.